Sup Shredders, my name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to an SP Reacts, where today we have ourselves 6 tracks off of an album from an act named Herman Martinez. This album is titled UltraTerrestrial. And if we switch over to here, we have ourselves the album on screen with the album art here with the 6 arms. I'm hoping that's the one there. It's really interesting art. It's beautiful. This isn't the first album that I reviewed from Herman by far. I've reviewed quite a fair bit of his music over the years, including Immortal Jellyfish, which is a really interesting album as well. But we're checking out UltraTerrestrial today, and we're going to listen through 6 of these tracks from start to finish. And we're going to hear what we think. Let's go, let's do it. Track number 1 off the album. And there's a lot of production value here with the Is this recorded with a single guitar, or is this double tracked?
There's something here pretending to be me. Or is it me pretending to be you? Fragments of film spliced together like always. Barely speak, so I'd better mean what I say.
And it's gorgeous with that major tonality here. The drums almost like they're outpanning the guitars, which is interesting. It's usually the other way around.
No human, you must have misunderstood. Not perfect, but parts of me are good. Fragments of film spliced together like always. Barely speak, so I'd better mean what I say.
It's great to transition off to the keys. Oh. it really does feel like you're going through space. But it's horrific in its intensity, though. So that was the first track off this album, titled Uncanny Valley. So as I understand the concept of Uncanny Valley, it's that the more sort of human or more realistic something becomes, the more it'll elicit a sense of discomfort, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe it is the UltraTerrestrial within the album art that is getting this reaction. Maybe it's Herman. I apologize if I mispronounced that. But like their experience either with someone in real life that they're shooting from, maybe they're speaking to themselves in the mirror. Maybe it could actually be an alien and like an Imagine thing. I'm not sure. Given the album title, it could be about aliens. But either way, I think it's an interesting subject. Now, we talk about disassociation briefly, and I'm kind of wondering whether that's him sort of like disassociating, sort of cope with the discomfort from this uncanniness that's occurring, and whether the album will proceed to move forward with that. Clearly, this is a stellar track for several reasons. The first, I think, is simply the production value and how intriguing it is. It makes you, I think, immensely curious with the way that you've got those spoken parts, the recordings, the voiceovers, the noise, and then you got these things going backwards and forwards in the stereo field, though. It's incredibly intense with the way it promotes itself. It builds and it crescendos over time. And there's just so much effort put into that. It's difficult to layer those things, to do that in studio, but I appreciate the effort put in there to create that environment. And you have the keys and the drums and other elements eventually come in, but it is the start of an album where you are basically just trying to sort of almost kind of communicate a sense of reaching out to the stars. And maybe that is the chatter at the start and end of the track, the reaching out to the aliens and realizing they're far more like us than we realize. And then for it to go into such a harsh tone with those guitars, the grunge aesthetic there with some of the more kind of heavier metal sort of stylings there with the minor and Phrygians and stuff like that, and Hammonds and pull-offs there. And the dissonance within some of those really sort of uncomfortable chords illustrates not just an understanding of music theory and composition, but also how to go between quote-unquote vibes and chapters within the piece for effect and also smoothly. But yeah, I just want to sort of first of all comment on the actual production value present with the effort put into layering of those parts and the sides. It's just fantastic to put that effort in and start. So, initially I was unsure about how those guitars sounded in the mix in the center of the stereo field, but I can't help but feel that was a deliberate decision to kind of make it seem like the music kind of goes in and out like that. And if that was the case, that's kind of incredible. It's almost like we're fluctuating in time with the beat. I think another thing to discuss, for example, the instrumental performances, and I'm going to be more specific because I assume these will be continued throughout the album, but one of the things I really appreciate the way the drums are played there and processed and put through the piece. It's a really organic, interesting performance because of the wide variety of groups we play, not just quarters, eighths, triplets, and sixteenths, but also working with different polyrhythms and polymeters and exploring the entirety of the drum kit. Not just relying on the accents being on the quarters or the eighths for those kicks there, making it unpredictable for the listener by sort of switching things up in a way that is carried over with some of the guitar parts and some of the piano parts and some of the strings and all those other parts as we go through the piece. Especially in that solo section, we just have really sort of fantastic guitar playing there, really interesting voicing to that and expression with the melodies. And these are juxtaposed with the chorus sections where they're more grandiose and warm and they shimmer in the ether, and it's just beautiful. Like, we know how to deliberately evoke these feelings from the listener. We're very attentive to what's required to illustrate these different angles to the dissonance that we're experiencing. And it's almost like we're celebrating the dissonance when it occurs. I think in addition to it, it's simply just that we get so much within that 5 minutes 30. It's a long time with the song, but what Herman does so well here are just, structuring and fleshing out a piece to make the most of that form factor. There's no filler. There are seamless transitions. Some of them are blunt but impactful in a positive way. Others just they kind of cascade or grow or they go between, and there's a really sort of pleasant bell curve from the start till the finish of the piece there, with a slow build into that sort of like really kind of heavy section, and the kind of contrast between the ones that follow there. And I think as well, the icing on the cake is simply that Herman's voice is not necessarily the focal point throughout. There's a lot of other stuff to pay attention to, but he knows how to navigate these complex harmonies and arrangements and instrumental layers and find a voice and a platform for himself to speak his truth, even if at times it seems like he's trying to be one with everything else. It's almost like he's getting lost in the music of the thoughts, which makes sense considering the lyrics. So yeah, a fantastic start to proceedings. We got Changeling now, track number 2 off the album. I will be giving my overall thoughts on the album as a whole at the end, but I'm just doing it per track at the moment. And listen to these guitar lines though, aren't they gorgeous? Changeling. Using harmonics in there as well. Or maybe not.
Nothing left to do but everything. Welcome back to where you've always been. Where do we begin? Watch the ink dry around your warm thoughts.
Fantastic harmonies on the mic.
Back and then take it apart. Nothing left but us.
And switching back to a more traditional 4/4 16 accents.
Disguises for place I hide.
Oh no, it's triplets.
An excuse to rhyme. How much of this is even real? Mouth is full of the voices I steal. One more time will feel. Shouldn't start here if you haven't seen the older season. Leave this place. Go back to your empty space. Take me away, your dreams. Leave this place. Go back to your empty space. Take me away, your dreams. Leave this place. Go back to your empty space. Take me away, your dreams. Leave this place. Go back to your empty space. Take me away, your dreams.
And the
All the times they are a changeling as are we. Leave this place. Empty space. Take me away, your dreams. Leave this place. Empty space. Take me away, your dreams. Leave this place. Go back to your empty space. Take me away, your dreams. Leave this place. Go back to your empty space.
mean, what is this, right? I mean, I'm not really sure how to interpret that one, Changeling. Whether it's someone adapting or sort of like adjusting to their environment, having to be whoever people need them to be. They say leave this place in the hook line, and then at the end, the guys sort of like, what I can hear of it is, I don't know what the hell is going on or something along those lines. Is it simply that the person is struggling to find their place in society or life there? Maybe they have come too close to reality, or they have been made this uncomfortable by it, and they're kind of assessing their own sort of like humanity and sort of position it, and they're going, oh, well, what do I do next? How do I adapt? And needing to find a new place and adapt to that, I suppose. Much like a lot of people need to with situations in life, you got to nothing stays the same. With that kind of little bit of sort of mystery to it on a first listen basis, I think that it's fantastic to have those vocal harmonies and sort of cool responses. It's fantastic to have not unconventional necessarily, but like sixths or sevenths, like extensions to those vocal harmonies there, to not just perfectly rely on like fifths. Maybe they were doing fifths or for octaves there, to kind of mess with unusual intervals, but to still be able to make that work within the confines and context of this piece there, which was a little bit shorter at 4 minutes 40, but still nonetheless filled with stuff. But there were just some parts where we were calling out, leave this place, and there were a little more low-key or calling responses there where we really kind of belted a bit, and it was just nice to have the dynamic range, but for still to be so sort of smooth within the pace. It's like the track had exactly as much sort of like room for it as was needed in order for it to not be too abrupt, but still gave it a bit of life at the same time. And I think part of the intrigue of the lower vocals near the end, the quieter ones in the electronic sample, was simply saying, hey, like keep listening, so you keep try to hear it, and then you hear these other noises around you as you try to figure it out. It's really intelligent. Just great work on the mic. Expression and harmonies were key. I also think it's a shout out to their guitar work, and in the early part of it especially, that we just navigated some really technically kind of like sophisticated arpeggios and sort of melodies, and these were not just diatonic within the major minors, but there was some sort of like modal parts there and chromatics, and it was just kind of really neat how we managed to go between those and modulate and still make it work. It's not an easy thing to do, to go outside of the box, but when we're trying to make music that's sort of ethereal or otherworldly, sometimes you need those mystical elements in order to sell it. And I think that we handled that here, and for it to cover it on one instrument, especially because we didn't have that build as we did last time, it's just incredible work there. I love the little harmonics, and the other kind of like layers had a kind of looped over and flowed into each other there. It was awesome. And I think there might have been some basses in there as well, but they are really subtle. And it had some upper guitar layers sort of like harmonizing the upper register there and amongst the middle, but just. And we had the drums coming eventually, and to go into that sort of like beat there where we mix triplets in and then kind of steer away from it a bit further and come back into that main kind of loop. It's just great sense of balance there and equilibrium. I think the final thing I wanted to mention was that kind of synthy, kind of industrial part of the end there, where you get a lot of that high and mid and kind of just completely remove it. And it's very kind of low oriented with stuff on the sides and moments of noise there. And it's just a fantastic blunt kind of like transition that does really kind of smack you in the face as a listener and go, okay, what's this now? What's happening? It makes you more curious. And you have like this slowing down, boom, and then you also have the drums playing some sort of like rolls and hi-hat and kick and snare patterns there, with some keys on the side there, and some guitar bends and stuff like that, and the voiceover and such. And just especially after what you've had so far with Changeling, it's just it signals that there's more to come. And I know that seems like an obvious thing because we're in an album, but you don't, if you're not really paying attention, you don't know how far you are through it. So that could almost kind of count as like an interlude or like a skit or something like in the track going to the next part. There's so much more to talk about with these tracks that we'll eventually get to. I just don't want to overload on one and then kind of fizzle out for the rest. We got Thagomizer, track number 3. Oh. The looping is super kind of surreal.
Random thoughts, I think our lyrics say nothing with more meaning.
Oh.
Till it's something worth explaining.
Parallels or just chromatics? I mean, it's deliberately progressive at this point, which I don't have an issue with it.
Every time we close our eyes, we seem to find the reasons why we're
I mean, so tight between the guitar riff, the rhythm guitar, and the right cymbal there.
Every time we close our eyes, we seem to find the reasons why we live.
A mixture of 6/8 and 7/8 there, if I'm not mistaken. Or 9/8 maybe. Takes a shift through the distorted guitars here. I don't know. It's just so beautiful. said it a few times, but it really is an adventure with every song, isn't it? And so that was track number 3 off of the album, titled Thagomizer. Now, I have done some very quick internet searching to find out that Thagomizer is a distinctive arrangement of spike-shaped osteoderms on the tails of some stegosaurian dinosaurs. Now, I take that with what I heard in the chorus sections about, or in the verse sections about having known about all this, having all this in your head, since before music was created, is kind of to identify that there's some sort of universal truth that was dictated before music was created by this person that we're making the song for or speaking to. Maybe the UltraTerrestrial. Maybe they were around in the time of the dinosaurs. Maybe the way that they exist or the way they look is like they've got like osteoderms. Maybe it is the spiking protection plates of the alien there, the way they protect themselves either intellectually or physically, I'm not sure. But either way, I think that it's a really just... Can I just say, I never know what to expect in a Herman Martinez album. It's always something quite intellectual and introspective and otherworldly and progressive and sometimes interstellar. And I like that because there is just so much music. It's about stuff where I think they overcomplicate the lyrics when it doesn't necessarily need to be. Like the way, like there is a way of explaining something that most people write songs about, like for example relationships or like events in your life, you know, interactions, and people will deliberately try and make it academic when in reality it almost sort of like disassociates people from the subject matter because then it just becomes too complicated. Or they will just try and make it about stuff that is relatable, hashtag, so that people will get down to it. But I feel like with Herman, it's music that is so personal to them, and this has been something throughout the discography, that you kind of want to enter their world simply because they made it interesting enough to get involved with, even if you don't necessarily relate or sort of understand it, you know, on the level they do. And I think it kind of takes you out of the mist of even thinking you can relate to someone who you're listening to because you don't know them. But their music has made you want to get involved in that. I think that's the power of music. And I appreciate that I'm having that experience at the moment. So that's, I think part of that is simply just because his song is one big adventure. It really is from start till finish. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Structurally, we have the storytelling that goes into this fantastic extended solo section across various instruments, distorted, clean guitars, with vocals kind of providing a nice pad-like effect as we go through it. But it's just a massive journey, and I love it because it's just what you want from a long... I mean, it's a 5-minute song, but it felt like 2 minutes, and that's testament to both Herman's writing capacity, but also the fact that it was loud enough to be interesting. There was a lot of smoothness to the piece, but you just kind of it was just really nice to listen to. Even in the distorted kind of grittier sections there with the guitars there with, you know, with the double kicks and everything like that might be a little bit alienating to some, but I feel like there's enough of a balance between the different tones and textures and styles within this, the progressive kind of jazz and rocking kind of stuff like that, to be able to make it work. I do need to give a shout out to the time signature choices on all the various sort of like meters that we used throughout this piece. And this is not something that's isolated to this one, but a shout out for being able to get all of those to work together, to go between sort of 4/4s or triplets or 7/8s or 6/8s or 9/8s, and to go between those so in a way that is so succulent. It's like you just are like, oh, I love it. I love that we're moving and changing grooves here, and we're going this way. There's twists and turns. It really does give a sense of identity and uniqueness to each of the individual parts of the piece there. If you'd all had this all on 4/4, or if you had this all on sort of 3/4 or something like that, it just would have been like kind of padded out, I think, because it would have been like, oh, we're literally just not... We're just trying to change the corporate. It's just one thing. I feel like if you're going to be this sort of like experimental, you got to go hard or go home. I also want to give a final shout out to how lush the keys are. They add a lovely kind of glow and warmth to this piece in the mid to upper register, not just because of the reverb tails, but because the actual the way the piano sounds there. It's luscious, and there are some parts where the distorted guitars kind of sound cold and brittle, and they have a fantastic flow and groove to them, and the note choices, the scale choices, etc. are fantastic. I love all the different decisions we make here, but it's just simply that when the keys come in, they're reliable. They're like a steady hand. When they're like, oh, we're gonna get a really kind of nice quote unquote sounding section here. This is gonna be it's gonna be really sweet, and I just think there are instruments at this point in time that Herman is using to communicate one way or another like that. And these are habitual things that you pick up on as you go through the piece and learn to recognize, and it's smart. I just want to note that, each of these pieces on their own is worthy as a single, just because of how unique they are. But there are things that connect them within the album as well. So the transitions are smooth too. The sequencing makes sense. We've got UltraTerrestrial at 741. What are we going to do with this one, eh? See what I mean? You never get that kind of edge to the keys. There's already so much this early into a longer form factor piece that, you don't know where are we going to end up. Ooh. See that there, boom, and I assume it'll go to a boom. Nope. See, he switches it up. It's unpredictable. It's just so cool how he kind of messes with expectations. 7888 7844 158. Well, it's just amazing that we can manage to tie these things together for 7.5 minutes, you know. But then we know to add these warbles around the side. Is that the whole piece? Okay, so UltraTerrestrial, track number 7 off of the album, because we skipped a few. What do we think this track is about? Truth be told, I'm not entirely sure. We talk about feeling a person's memories and turning dreams into reality, and there's so much more than that. And I can't tell whether it's a conversation between two parties or someone just sort of discussing the story of the person overall. Maybe it's the person touching the human being, the alien touching the human being and saying they can feel their memories and turn their dreams into reality. I'm not sure. But either way, it's an interesting song for sure. I did enjoy my time with it. There were some parts where I was kind of zoning out, having a kind of an out-of-body experience a little bit. Not because of, because I was bored. Because it wasn't bored at all. It was more because there were parts where there weren't lyrics. And I was just sitting there vibing to the music, and it was like you just start kind of drifting off to another place. It's an interesting experience that you don't always have. Sometimes music is just intrinsically less, there's just not as much going on. And you sit there and you go, what possibly could I be doing with my time that is better than this? With this one, because there's enough change in sort of like within the structure, enough variety within the composition, you're not left with that. But there are some times where I think at this part of the album, you could potentially sort of like concur that there are safe spots to just sort of like dream away with it. And it's fantastic, you know, when Herman is singing, and that's not all the time, that's probably about half of the track, which is impressive because oftentimes, you know, you need the vocals to carry people through a song. You know, you're sitting there kind of like absorbing that. And it's pleasant to hear their voice and sing along in those fourth intervals or however they're doing it. Maybe even not. I'm not sure. The intervals are tricky. I need to have a keyboard here that I can sort of tap away on and actually figure them out. But I adore that what we're trying to do in terms of the actual just knowing to have a part stay constant. There's a part around 6 minutes 30 or so a line with like where it just kind of like slows down with hi-hat, eighth notes and kicks and snares and these kind of resplendent guitar tones there and a sort of lo-fi ambience, and you just are left there just to kind of nod your head and kind of get sucked into it. And there's keys kind of cascading off of the side of that as well, there being a familiar sort of sound within the album. And it's just a safe harbor, I suppose. There are some really intriguing decisions here in terms of the note choices as well. I think that there was a part earlier in the piece where I was trying to sort of predict how it would resolve, and then Herman, they took it away. And they went to a completely unexpected one. Then they went to resolution. Then they lifted back up again. And you're just left in a position where you're kind of almost being puppeteered into like one point or another. And it's kind of a surreal experience because usually a lot of the time you want there to be adjustment. But it's not, a lot of the stuff I listen to isn't this kind of like wild and zany, but it works because we manage, as per previous tracks, to have it sort of like, transfer it neatly into, like bass lines that work neatly together. If there's like a kind of a twist or turn as well, it usually makes sense with the lyrics. All the instruments go in that direction as well, so it's not like you have one thing that's kind of going away from everything else. There's a sense of unison and purpose behind everything, which makes it seem more impactful and deliberate. And I think there's just decisions like at the start that kind of traditional kind of like, I don't know what that is. Is it a guitar? Is it a lute? There's just a sort of like a folk instrument at the start which plays an interesting melody, and that one part they're kind of opening the piece by itself as a novelty when we think of how thick and full a lot of the composition is. Just to have that at the beginning pique our interest is just stunning. So I think what I've spoken about so far is more so the note choices and the structure of it potentially, as well as the choices of different riffs and chord progression styles and different sort of like combinations to incite a sense of peace or forced movement. I think the final thing I'll sort of comment on are the drums again, but primarily because of the finesse for some of those 30 seconds, the little kind of like two-handed right hand bits, the little tom fills flowing through there, and how sort of like well connected it was to everything else within the arrangement. They're so tight to the guitar parts. They're so clinically comfortable with the click. It sounds like they're fantastic with the drums. I think that it allows us to navigate a lot of these more complicated parts of the arrangements without there being any lack of polish. It's just, especially with a 7:40-minute 41 piece, you can't have parts, especially in the early stages, which sound a bit flat or a little bit uncomfortable, because people will assume that a lot of the album is going to be like that if that's the case. So no flaws to this one. A very sort of, again, it's a surreal experience. I don't necessarily feel as if I fully understand it, but I nonetheless appreciate what we're trying to accomplish there, or at least the musicality of it. But we got Soul, track number 8.
Everything for you. To live within your truth. Stars in the sky, bowing down to your light. Find me inside our unusual love.
I don't know if there's going to be as much chaos in this one.
Thoughts we
They are sevenths. And octaves. Crazy. Soul. Such a beautiful song. I've said beautiful a lot of times, but it's true. It's a good word for it. So I think that Soul was a song about just how incredible the sun is, the ability for it to give life, the fact that other stars bow down to it, just its immense kind of like pressure and, you know, importance to the solar system, to the universe, you know. And when you think about that, our actual sun, our soul, our sun, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? It's interesting, you know. I feel like it connects to the UltraTerrestrial in some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure. I mean, you look at the album art there, and it makes a lot of sense in that regard, like the sun being the core of it, you know. Part of what I think works really neatly here are that some of Herman's vocals are just so exquisite. They are gorgeous with their sevenths or their octaves there. They double track their vocals and some of the verse parts as well, and you can hear how clearly he's hitting the notes and getting them to resonate together. There's a lovely shimmer to them. But you can also hear there's like occasional moments where they're not perfectly together, like at the start of lines or sentences, which shows that they're not relying on post-production help. They can just clearly sing. And that's testament to their sort of expertise and experience as a musician. But it's also relevant in terms of just the fact that they know that maybe the song would not suit having an auto-tune performance, you know. They just know what they're doing in that regard. And the way they call out and other parts kind of like chant or sort of like hum notes there, the way they explore their vocal range within this piece is just sensational there. And just having that soul or that beautiful sort of hook line melody there at the start, having things call and response and mirror it is just wonderful. I also think it's the interesting note choices of that piano at the start of the piece there. It's like an unconventional melody beginning the piece there that elicits a sense of otherworldliness. It's like, oh, we're kind of working with a strange note there. That kind of lets you know immediately off the cuff that we're in for a bit of a ride. We could have had like a really sort of beautiful, sort of more traditional kind of like major or even seventh arpeggio or something like that, or even some susses or fourths, but like we kind of fly around that, and it just makes sense when you consider the grandiose nature, the size of what we're trying to cover. What I also kind of appreciate about this track is that it's more of a consistent song as opposed to some of the really kind of wild, zany stuff we've had in other parts of this album. You kind of click through parts of it and you can hear a similar sort of like tonal like progression or like a connection to the key signature instantiated. You can, even though there's like some chromatics and parallel chords and stuff like that, you know, triads, there's you know, like we mess around with all sorts of fun little tricks. It doesn't seem as disassociated or kind of different as throughout. And I think that having songs like that in an album, especially in a shorter form factor, is helpful, because for some people listening for the first time, especially if they're not used to this music, it might be quite a lot to go through songs where there is far more going on there. It can be good to kind of go, oh, we're showing our love for the sun and how much it provides for us and our connection for it. And especially when the intent is so gorgeous and so loving and so caring, for the song to show that kind of glow throughout there and that kind of like self-awareness in connection and chemistry is just really important. So I am thankful that we have a sort of different tracks approached differently to have their level of kind of palativity, generalized palatability encouraged, whilst also respecting, I think, our own creative sort of like intuition and trying to sort of do some sort of like wilder stuff as well. Yeah, honestly, I think it's fantastic. We've got one more song though today, Origins. At 9:14, it's one of the longest songs that I reviewed in a while, but let's go, let's do it. It's number 11, the last track for today. That's a guitar doing that little kind of lead riff there. The bass is so full though. Dynamic range. I mean, it's feisty for sure. I'm not sure why we're going back to these lead riffs, like melodically, compositionally. Is there a ping pong to light all the keys or just that one? I mean, like, this is the epitome of an adventure of some kind with organs, you know? So why that into this? Is this in a theme we had in a previous track? It is, didn't we? We've had this one before. Oh, fantastic. Sneaky little build there. And that's it. That's the album, I assume. Crazy. 9 minutes 14 well spent. So Origins, I think, is more of an instrumental piece there. I mean, you can tell there was a lack of vocals. And I can't help but feel as if it's maybe going back after everything we discussed with the album to maybe talk about the formulation of the creation of the universe there, maybe surrounding the solar system, I'm not sure. I'm considering we were talking about the sun before, maybe where the UltraTerrestrial was involved as the original being there. Either way, it's interesting to have the peaks and the troughs there. I think that's a stellar effort there to be able to sort of facilitate all the different angles of that rise to prominence there. And I think it's a nice way to flesh things out. I think one of the things that I've done well within this track are, as I mentioned, the fact that it's an instrumental. Not that I dislike listening to Herman sing, but it's also nice for him to be able to sort of have confidence in his ability as a musician and not needing to rely excessively on his voice in order to keep the listener's attention. It's a piece where you have a wide variety of different drum, guitar, bass, and occasional key and string motifs there. The guitar, but yeah, that's basically one of them, just before going into specifics. It's just great to be able to have the vocals kind of tell the story that they need to, and then like let the music sort of sign it out as the big finale. I don't think we could have said anything here that would add further context to it. Stuff's quite elaborately or clearly explained throughout the majority of what I've heard in this. And it just, there's a lot of depth to it, so you need more time with it to sort of fully grasp it, but ultimately it's very satisfying. And I think it's also just the choice of textures from a production perspective, but I've already spoken about that in the first piece, so it's something, I suppose there's been that consistency through the entire album. I think here another thing to sort of mention is the actual just change of tempo in certain parts. Some parts we were far more slow and measured and taken, they were quiet and things were kind of there in the ether, kind of sitting there, and you had some like polite little melodies or harmonies, arpeggios going on there, and it was kind of was peaceful, I suppose. And then suddenly you have some like gallops or blast beats kind of stuff going on there. Other points are boisterous. There's like these huge kind of like variations in intensity throughout the piece there that catch you by surprise. And I like the fact that we were able to sort of make that work, because it's very difficult to do so. It's very difficult often to justify those big shifts. But I think with the vast majority of this album setting up all these movements between different ideas and factions here, having an instrumental completely go full bore with it makes sense. You know, we had the reverse takes and the kind of talking stuff going on at the start there, and the strings, and it's very kind of like misty, and it was almost like a signal being sort of like sent back, and then suddenly you have the story of the universe propelled straight into you, and it just never stops. It just never stops unleashing on you, and you just have that again, that journey, that adventure that I've spoken about across a lot of this album, where you get to the point at the end which kind of like hits you in the teeth and it's out. And you're thankful for it. And then the final thing I'll discuss before going to the conclusion is I haven't spoken about the guitars much throughout this, aside from like a lot of the rhythm sections. And I think the lead guitars here are fantastic within this. They're not overcomplicated solos. It's not like a virtuosic shred kind of thing, but he's clearly a really sort of like sensational guitarist who knows how to have impactful flavor, speed when required, bends and bits of dissonance and some unison kind of transitions, and he knows his scales and modes, and he knows when to break the rules and when to follow them. So you just get these really so occasionally chaotic, occasionally kind of like just wonderful, just these sorts of voices on lead guitar that suit whatever we're playing over. Sometimes they call and respond, sometimes they harmonize, sometimes they fight each other, sometimes they get along. But whatever situation we're in is typically, again, very thoughtful. And you walk away thinking, hey, we've kind of handled all of these instruments really neatly. I haven't really spoken that much about the bass or the strings, for example, but they're as subsidiary ones and more sort of mood-setting components there. They may not need to be as active, you know. It's just there are so many different solo sections within this instrumental piece at 9 minutes, but it never felt like too much. It never felt superfluous. It was deliberate, and again, testament to their understanding to be able to sort of make this work, and I think, again, fitting outro. So we're going to talk about this album more in the conclusion. And so welcome to the conclusion of my review of this album from an act named Herman Martinez, titled UltraTerrestrial. I'm not sure what this track is about. I mean, I kind of have a best guess at it. I think it's about a being, either one that's too familiar to us, in the Uncanny sense, or one that is constantly changing to suit needs, one that has been around since the start of time, one that is involved in like the making of life and is the center of the universe potentially, and then one that we finally reach them and communicate with them, and then we like learn the history of the universe as we know it. So it's an interesting thing to write a song about, and I adore it. I think it's just a great sort of unique subject matter that I have not heard about in an album, let alone a song, and I think that it's explored really neatly throughout this album. I feel like if this is the state of these 6 tracks we listened through today, the rest of the remaining 5 will be fantastic, and it's worth a listen if you're keen. I think one of the things that worked really well with this album is just generalized kind of feedback, because I've spoken about the tracks and their individual little mini conclusions. One of them was Herman on the mic, and we had great vocal technique, comfortable and had just voice. We spoke our piece, we sung really neatly. We were very sort of like comfortable with different harmonies, intervals for sort of 7ths, 8ths, 6ths, octaves, etc. And we knew to call and respond when required. We knew how to interact with the other elements within the arrangement. And there's never a point where I was like, this seems sort of like unnecessary, or I don't understand why this is happening. He always communicated in a way which was really palatable and easy to listen to, even when he was calling out, even when there was exasperation or more sort of like oomph to it. It was great. There's just so much polish to it at this point. I've said polish a lot, but it's because of the experience that they have at this point. And you go into an album walking like you're going to hear an interesting story, and you might not know what it's about neatly, but you're going to enjoy listening to it because of the vocals. I think another thing to sort of mention here is the overall instrumental performance across the guitars, bass, drums, the strings, and the piano parts, as well as any of the sort of like reverse layers, production elements, the different sort of spoken Foley parts or anything like that. It's a piece where there is so much variety across the various sort of 8th quarter 16th note grooves on the drums, the various sort of time signatures and meters and polymetric patterns there, the tempo changes, the various sort of like shifts and times and transitions, and just simply being so proficient with those grooves on the kit. There was never a note missed. The guitar as well, navigating the really like complicated harmonic arrangements there with the accidental chords, the parallel, we had all these different chromatics and unusual sort of like choices. We would swing the listener back and forth. Other times we were far more measured and controlled there, but we never had a generic sounding track there with a popular kind of like chord progression. There was always some sort of twist in the tail, which made it a bit more kind of classy, and I appreciate that. It wasn't always a comfortable experience listening to in parks. There was a deliberate decision on the part of the songwriters involved. But I think that with this kind of otherworldly kind of mystical stuff, you don't necessarily want it to sound too cut and clean anyway. So ultimately, I think that the decisions made in regards to the songwriting parts of the album were fantastic, but I especially want to give a shout out to the instrumental components there. The actual performances, especially with the drums and guitar, they were fantastic. And the keys were well played as well, a variety of different sort of like scale choices and quarter parts. But they were more sort of like to suit the aura, to create the aura and atmosphere within it. I think with the strings and bass in particular, they were more sort of supportive. They probably had parts where they were a bit more sort of virtuosic, but like a lot of the time they were sort of filling in the low end, supporting the key sort of points of focal points, and just adding to the atmosphere. I think finally the structuring of the tracks was just sensational. I mean, whether it was a sung part, a more sort of traditional track like soul with verses and choruses, or Origins was just fun and completely instrumental, or at least mostly instrumental. It's just these are an album where we never had too much of the same thing. We never felt like things were overdrawn. There was no filler. There was no misuse of real estate. Everything was either transitioning from one to the other, or we had like different time signatures between goes of bars, or we had all these different layers of dynamic range there with the bell curves going down and up like that at the end of certain tracks, or just have big finishes. We'd have changes in like the intensity and loudness of parts to catch you by surprise there, or it'd be so smooth and full of those like luscious, wonderful reverb and delay tails there with interesting panning on certain parts just from Uncanny Valley alone. We had these kind of fragmented, kind of gritty, distorted guitar tones as well there, which were just a structural component as well, like we're hitting you with the double kicks now, the gallops and the bass and drums coming together. There were so many styles of music, some sort of jazzy in, for instance, some folkish starts, like with kind of like lutes and stuff like that at the beginning of some pieces. Other parts were heavy as hell. Other parts were sort of ambient and atmospheric and electronics, like or sort of synthesizer or something like that. It's just there's so many cool ideas within this that are put forward in a way where they integrate and they make a song that makes sense with the lyrics for the most part, with origins you can only imagine, and it's a fun time doing so. Production-wise as well, I usually speak about a few things, but I feel like it's worth mentioning it. The production within this album is fantastic as well. I know I wasn't initially sure about the guitars being in the center of the mix. I still do kind of feel like the guitars could have been wider in the mix in certain elements there, like the rhythm guitars and stuff like that could have been wider in the mix just for a bit of more roundness, but I also understand that we might have wanted them in the center as a deliberate decision for like the universe going in and out or something like that, so I respect that. It's just me being transparent as a reviewer. That's basically the only slightly constructive critique I have, is that I think that it would have been a fuller mix and master if those had been recorded on the sides, more sort of like even 50-50 band, but nonetheless, it's an incredibly well-produced and recorded album now with a really proficient vocal performance on top. And I enjoyed my time listening through it, as always, from Herman Martinez. Great album. So thank you very much for watching my review of this album from an actor named Herman Martinez, titled UltraTerrestrial, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show them some love via the various social medias and the Bandcamp page, and stay cool, stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, and I'll catch you in the next SB Reacts. Spiderhands out.